focuses the frame on a single indisputable fact: who went upstairs. Funky answers. Mendeecees and his friend went upstairs. This statement becomes a turning point because it introduces proximity at the very moment that Tamar subsequently associates with pain, blood, and terror. Funky declines to speculate about what transpired upstairs, but he does identify the people present. And who wasn't? He then goes back to Tamar's public remarks regarding her illness, not mockingly, but clinically. He remembers her saying that she nearly died when she woke up in a pool of blood. Funky challenges Tamar's refusal to call an ambulance after she claims she nearly died. He then compares it with her admission that someone proposed calling an ambulance and she declined. He doesn't say she wasn't harmed, but he raises concerns about coherence. Since declining to call for help after recounting a near-death experience leaves a void that the internet will unavoidably fill. Funky doesn't have to fill it himself because he knows that others will do the same. As the clips become viral, viewers start adding context to the quiet. They draw attention to Tamar's quick recuperation, quirky allusions, the lack of medical follow-up details, and the absence of names in his narrative, all of which create interpretive space. This is the point at which Tamar loses control of the plot. Funky is not directly responsible for the title, language, test, fake lead, or arrest. Funky never accuses medical fraud. Instead, it arises from reaction, comments, patched footage, and individuals attempting to reconcile two irreconcilable accounts. Never validates testing, but by carefully dissecting the time frame, he creates a surface on which conjecture might cling, and it doesn't remain concentrated on Tamar. It turns to Yandi. And Funky mentions her briefly close to the end of his story. Without theatrics, Funky states that Yandi was the only one who was harmed. That one remark completely changes the context. Silence begins to feel strategic if Yandi was wronged. Someone crossed a line, and that line was crossed during a night marked by secrecy, redirected plans, and mysterious injuries. Funky doesn't provide solutions. And the first section ends with a narrative that is now focused on structure, movement, and presence rather than emotion. After he provides coordinates, the audience begins to fill in the blanks as it always does. The viewer no longer questions Tamar's feelings once those coordinates are established. Instead, the story responds to pattern rather than emotion. Start questioning how her account works. And the more people compare her statements to Funky's schedule, the more the gaps cease to sound accidental. What Tamar publicly delivered was vulnerability without architecture. She avoided anchors while describing injury, panic, and uncertainty. She did not provide a transition point, a sequence. Explanation for how a night of social mobility changed into a medical emergency that she says she doesn't comprehend. Too many people interpret that absence as insulation rather than trauma, because, when repeated carefully, ambiguity can shield more than it exposes. I'm not aware of what actually happened to me. It's not denial. Viewers start concentrating on the phrase itself. It's suspension, not accusation, and suspension invites interpretation, particularly when combined with dramatic statements. Funky recognizes this intuitively. He portrays it as a tactic she's employed in the past, saying just enough to spark conjecture but withholding the certainty to it. Rather than claiming Tamar lied about being injured, the internet, ready for indignation, doesn't wait for, and that charge lands not because it's loud, but because it explains the turmoil that ensued. It responds to suggestion, and Tamar's was potent. She made reference to blood. The audience's protective instincts are triggered by facts like nearly dying. But they change when those same things are not articulated. They begin clinging to the closest unresolved presence, which is Mendeecees, not says, who went upstairs. Of aggression or misconduct because Funky builds proximity and then won't soften it. He says who didn't. Then he says it again and lets the repetition do the trick. And once that framing is in place, perception hardens. And Tamar's insistence that she doesn't know what happened starts to feel more like avoidance than uncertainty. Online conversation goes from sympathy to suspicion. Comment sections begin to question why clarity was never sought instead of whether Tamar was wronged. She genuinely didn't know what had happened, so why did she out? Why wasn't there an investigation? Why wasn't there any urgency? Why did she openly discuss near while secretly refusing? Funky doesn't ask they just naturally come up. The whole self-control is important because when someone highlights inconsistencies without speculating, the listener feels they are suppressing information for a purpose. Funky presents himself as collateral damage, someone drawn into a story against his will, repeating that he didn't want to talk, that he didn't need anything from you and didn't gain anything by talking to you. I was your true friend. And I'm still talking about how the backlash fell on him while others were shielded. This narrative appeals to viewers who feel duped. The narrative surrounding Tamar starts to change from victimization to agency, not agency, in causing harm, but agency influencing response, claiming that Tamar used uncertainty to safeguard certain connections while letting rumors burn through, that she knew exactly what she was doing by portraying harm without reason, and that she understood how this interpretation shared by everyone. Although many continued to support her, citing shock, pain, and the right to privacy, the debate's very existence is a turning point. Funky accentuates this breach by going back to the aftermath and describing how swiftly the story swung against him. Stories that feel controlled cause sympathy to break. He doesn't deny that a true buddy might have gone upstairs. But bloggers and commentators portrayed him as careless, heartless, and someone who abandoned a friend. After accepting that criticism, he refutes it by stating that Tamar wasn't alone. This is where the reasoning changes once more. If Tamar wasn't alone, then after Funky's absence is reframed as respect for limits rather than maltreatment. Viewers start to see that the earlier outcry against him was misguided. They get resentful at Tamar as well as the story itself. When they begin to wonder if they were led to fury without knowing the entire background, at this point, the narrative shifts from what transpired that evening to what transpired later on, that is, how a version of events was let to spread uncontrolled, about how some things were highlighted while others were obscured, about how public harm was violent. Violence becomes the main theme. Tamar doesn't explain. Mendeecees doesn't speak in public. Yandi doesn't participate after spoken his piece. Funky won't take it back. Silence starts to sound deliberate rather than strategic. Dot and strategy raise suspicions. Funky is not the originator of the term test fake. Arises from the audience's desire to make sense of discrepancies. If injuries healed rapidly, if no emergency response was sought, if months went by with no answers, or if the story remained unresolved, then it's possible that the narrative was overstated or misrepresented, or manipulated. Those are viewer assumptions, not Funky's assertions, but they endure because no one challenges them. Viewers start analyzing Funky's tone as these theories spread, drawing a different kind of attention to the story, one that is analytical rather than gossip-driven. How composed he is when talking about practicalities and how passionate he becomes when talking about betrayal. And they interpret as sincerity, not because emotion equals truth, but because it does. They contrast. Presentation is a combination of factual absence and emotional vulnerability. Yandi's name starts to appear more frequently here. And Funky's insistence that she was the only one harmed reframes the event so that the imbalance becomes the narrative. It implies that whatever happened had relationship repercussions that went beyond Tamar's physical. That trust was betrayed. Shifting the entire scenario from injury to an audience that has become accustomed to reading between the lines via years of reality television finds resonance in quiet, maybe even evasive. Regard Yandi's of a private resolution because they are aware of what transpired, but because they think something irreversible occurred. The term arrest enters the conversation with caution. Funky mentions it not as a conviction, but as a progression. He maintains innocence and presents it as pressure rather than evidence. However, even that framing raises the stakes, because, even in theory, the introduction of legal language alters the perception of silence, making it appear more like counsel rather than avoidance. At this point, the audience is monitoring behavior rather than waiting for responses. Who shows up, who vanishes, who intensifies, and who retreats. At the end of Section 2, the story is no longer based on assertions but rather on consequences. And they see each non-response as evidence that the truth is unstable. The lack of a retort weighs allegation. So it's not what people say, but what they don't correct. The story continues. When he begins speaking, the room doesn't blow up. It gets tighter. There's an intentional pause. Calculation, not hesitancy for drama. Knowing exactly what's going to happen. Funky leans into the moment. His tone diminishes as soon as he speaks. He settles his shoulders. Do you know what actually occurred to you? No, I'm not. Or are you? What? I don't know what actually happened, but I can talk about it. And before anyone can stop the story, he acknowledges something most commentators never do. Uncertainty. Funky said he's still not sure how to react to Tamar. It doesn't sound like gossip after that one admission. Which establishes the tone. It sounds like someone making corrections to a song that has already gotten out of control. Moments Tamar appears on camera earlier, calculated and cautiously far away. She doesn't name anyone when asked if she knows what actually occurred to her that evening. Nothing is denied by her. Either way, she makes room. Tamar claims she has no idea what actually occurred to her. What the internet hears is different. Uncertainty is not heard by it. It picks up on omissions. Screens begin to clip. Comments begin to pile up. In an attempt to understand how someone could depict injuries, blood, and panic while maintaining they have no idea what caused it, viewers repeatedly rewind the scene. That's when Funky interrupts and doesn't. He brushes off the remainder of the interview as unimportant. Structurally, not emotionally. Then he turns to face Tamar. As someone whose name is already being dragged through a tale, he claims rather than as a buddy or commentator. Tamar outright of lying about the evening. The term has a heavy landing. It reframes everything that came before it. Not because it's loud. The response changes in a matter of minutes. Viewers begin drawing timelines instead of arguing over tone. The evening that was presented as a birthday celebration starts to take on a new appearance. Emotions are replaced with places. That bothers me greatly because I'm telling you to your damn face. You had a bold, bald head. Memory is replaced by movement. Suddenly, the quiet surrounding Mendeecees' name seems louder than any spoken words. The narrative changes in real time as clips circulate and theories conflict. What began as a story about health becomes something completely different, because the question is no longer what happened. This explains why so many details were left unexplained. There's no turning back the narrative once that question. Mendeecees and his homeboy enter. All right, so this is the third time that you and I have been hanging out. Suddenly, as the line, this starts, and won't let the interview take its own course. The story's tone entirely shifts. He handles tomorrow's vulnerability as structure, rather than emotion, building. Come see us at Sauce. I tell everyone that I truly don't want to go. I over to Sauce. By the time I reach, Sasso calls and says, leave your car at her place and we're going to go to V. He challenges how the story was constructed by birthday celebration. The first pillar she put underneath it, rather than disputing her feelings. That narrative is not only false, but fundamentally incorrect according to Funky, who clarifies that the night started off with hunger rather than intention or charity, according to his account. Tamar was just trying to find a place to eat because everything in their neighborhood was closed. Ruth's Chris wasn't a celebration. Backup plan. A last resort. Particular element instantly relieves the night of the emotional burden. Later, Tamar became, in Funky's version, what had been presented as a friendly gesture toward a buddy became into. It's a casual encounter that gradually turned into something else. Additionally, Funky doesn't overstate the transition. He records it location by location and decision by decision, pointing out that Tamar frequently as something she did for someone else, when he claimed about him at all. Repetition causes the second fracture. Funky points out that Tamar and Mendeecees had previously made surprising appearances doubts. He makes no accusations or conjectures. He only remarks that this pattern has several times. Funky notes Mendeecees' unexpected appearance during several hangouts. The stakes are altered by that one observation because coincidence becomes less credible when it occurs again. One unexpected presence can begins to feel deliberate. And Funky lets the viewer decide how to take it, letting the discomfort do the talking. The night then starts to break up into activity. Funky claims he was exhausted and on the verge of passing away. I didn't play it in this interview, but you indicated in this interview with L'Oreal that you died when you woke up in a pool of blood at the time you went online. That they stated, we need to call the ambulance while you were at home with David or someone else. Plans changed despite the fact that he wanted to return home. First to Saw and Buckhead, then to V12. Every reroute a different option and an additional instance in which Funky expresses his desire to stop. He talks about driving independently, resisting the plan, and then being forced to completely ditch his car. Funky talks about being ordered to get out of his car and walk somewhere alone, which sounds insignificant. Someone was guiding the night's course, someone was making sure they were close, and it seemed dominating. Tamar's subsequent assertion of uncertainty starts to seem less natural the more Funky describes those decisions. What Funky highlights next isn't scandal, it's discomfort. He describes how he frequently sees Tamar and Mendeecees together at eateries during a music video near and making physical contact. That he was never at ease with their relationship not because of rumors, but because we returned to her home and I assumed they wanted to be up there. Alone after she and Mendeecees had finished. Kissing in the back of that fucking car, I didn't go upstairs when we were left off at Tamar's house because you sitting on his lap in that goddamn Uber and you two were kissing. Instead, I got in my stupid car and drove home. All right, based on what he saw firsthand, he is cautious and doesn't claim that anything unlawful occurred. And since they were the ones who went upstairs with you, what happened to your damn teeth is Mendeecees and his best friends. He doesn't say anything conclusive, only that boundaries were enough blurred for him to feel uncomfortable. When the night comes to an end and Funky explains why he didn't go upstairs with Tamar, that discomfort becomes crucial. The story takes a dramatic turn at that point. Until then, the public's response had characterized his absence as desertion. With commenters asking why he abandoned a buddy, Funky reframes everything by saying that he didn't go upstairs because Tamar and Mendeecees were kissing in the car, implying that he didn't protect her home. Funky's privacy and his superfluous, even in, is significantly contradicts Tamar as solitary and adds, it's giving. Not socially, not emotionally, and at least not physically. He describes Tamar sitting on Mendeecees' lap in the Uber. The picture lands because it is precise, which is risky, not because it is exciting. The public discourse starts to diverge at this point because it provides the audience with something tangible to compare against. Subsequent statements of uncertainty. While some viewers focus on the logistical, irregular outlines, others defend Tamar, claiming that tragedy can skew memory. Funky purposefully avoids answering the topic of how someone can be present, loving and engaged, but later claiming they had no idea what happened to them. Rather, he focuses the frame on a single indisputable fact: who went upstairs. Funky answers, Mendeecees and his friend went upstairs. This statement becomes a turning point because it introduces proximity at the very moment that Tamar subsequently associates with pain, blood, and terror. Funky declines to speculate about what transpired upstairs, but he does identify the people present wasn't. He then goes back to Tamar's public remarks regarding her illness, not mockingly, but clinically. He remembers her saying that she nearly died when she woke up in a pool of blood. Funky challenges Tamar's refusal to call an ambulance after she claims she nearly died. He then compares it with her admission that someone proposed calling an ambulance and she declined. He doesn't say she wasn't harmed, but he raises concerns about coherence. Since declining to call for help after recounting a near-death experience leaves a void that the internet will unavoidably fill. Funky doesn't have to fill it himself because he knows that others will do the same. As the clips become viral, viewers start adding context to the quiet. They draw attention to Tamar's quick recuperation, quirky allusions, the lack of medical follow-up details, and the absence of names in his narrative, all of which create interpretive space. This is the point at which Tamar loses control of the plot. Funky is not directly responsible for the title, language, test, fake lead, or arrest. Funky never accuses medical fraud. Instead, it arises from reaction, comments, patched footage, and individuals attempting to reconcile two irreconcilable accounts. Never validates testing, but by carefully dissecting the time frame, he creates a surface on which conjecture might cling, and it doesn't remain concentrated on Tamar. It turns to Yandi. And Funky mentions her briefly close to the end of his story. Without theatrics, Funky states that Yandi was the only one who was harmed. That one remark completely changes the context. Silence begins to feel strategic if Yandi was wronged. Someone crossed a line, and that line was crossed during a night marked by secrecy, redirected plans, and mysterious injuries. Funky doesn't provide solutions.